There is a recorder in that boat. The words slipped out of the small black girl's lips like a secret carried by the wind. Her voice was low, trembling but certain. She stood on her tiptoes, leaning closer to the man in the navy blue suit, her hands cupped around her mouth, as if afraid the walls themselves might hear. The man froze. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. Behind him, the gentle hum of the yacht filled the silence, the faint rhythm of wealth and still water. But that one sentence had sliced through it like a blade. The girl's name was Lila, barely 8 years old, yet her gaze held the weight of someone who had seen too much. The light from the window fell across her face, tracing the outline of courage on skin the color of warm mahogany. The man, Matthew Hale, a self-made millionaire, slowly turned toward her. "What did you say?" His voice was low, heavy, the kind that usually made people shrink back, but Lila did not. Her small chin lifted. "There is a recorder," she whispered again, slower this time, "in that boat." For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes drifted toward the polished wooden model ship on the table between them, a perfect miniature of the yacht they stood in now. Its tiny sails caught the light. It looked harmless, decorative, beautiful, but something in Lila's tone made the air tighten. Behind the white partition wall, unseen by both of them, a woman with golden hair held her breath. Her manicured fingers gripped the edge of the wall. Her name was Elena, Matthew's fiancée. The light shimmered across her diamond ring as her eyes darted between the man and the child. Inside the cabin, the hum of the ocean seemed louder now. Lila's whisper had awakened something, a quiet storm. Matthew leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Who told you that?" he asked, trying to sound calm, though his pulse raced beneath his skin. Lila shook her head slowly. "I just heard it," she said. "When you left the room, it was talking." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Matthew's gaze fell back on the model ship. The carved wood gleamed under the sunlight, flawless, innocent, and yet, now, it seemed to stare back at him. He rose from his chair. The sound of it scraping against the floor was loud, sharp, final. Lila stepped back, clutching her small hands together. The yacht swayed gently, and the reflection of the sea danced across their faces. Behind the wall, Elena's lips parted. For the first time, her perfect smile faltered. And somewhere deep inside that room, silence began to crack, the kind that only truth could break. The office that once felt calm now held the stillness of a storm before it breaks. The model ship sat on the desk like a silent witness, its sails frozen mid-breath. Matthew Caldwell leaned forward, studying it with a stare that could cut through glass. The words from the little girl still echoed in his head. There is a recorder in that boat. They were soft, but they had split open something inside him. Security had arrived quietly, 2 men in navy suits standing by the doorway, unsure of what they were guarding against. Clara remained near the wall, her face carefully composed, every muscle trained to stay pleasant. The only one who looked natural was Lila, the child who had whispered the warning. She stood by the window, her small hands folded in front of her, eyes fixed on the sea beyond the glass. Matthew turned toward her. "You said you saw someone last night," he said slowly. "Where exactly were you?" Lila looked up. Her voice was small, but clear. "In the hallway, by the vending machine. I wait there when my mother finishes cleaning. I saw her walk into your office with a bag." She took the ship off the shelf and spoke into it. Clara gave a quick laugh, brittle as glass. "Matthew, this is ridiculous. You are letting a child tell ghost stories in your office. It is just a model, that is all." Matthew's gaze did not leave the ship. He nodded to one of the security guards. "Check the inside," he said, carefully. The man hesitated, then removed the glass dome and lifted the ship. The sails rustled faintly. He turned it over, examined the base, then froze. "Sir," he said, voice tightening, "there is a compartment here." The air went thin. The only sound was the soft click of metal as the guard pried open the bottom panel. Inside, half hidden by wires, was a tiny silver square. "It is a recorder," the guard said. Clara's smile wavered, but she tried to hold it. "That could be anything," she said quickly. "Maybe it came from the manufacturer." Matthew stood. His chair rolled back with a low scrape against the marble floor. "This ship was handmade," he said, "by a craftsman in Maine. There is nothing mass-produced about it. Clara's throat tightened. Her hand went to her necklace, twisting it once, twice. You are overreacting. Do you hear yourself right now? You are accusing me because of a child's story. Lila took one small step forward. Her voice was steady, but her tone was kind, not cruel. It is not a story. I heard her say, he will never know. She said it to the boat. The room stopped breathing. Matthew's eyes lifted to Clara's. For the first time, he noticed something unfamiliar there, a flash of fear beneath the surface calm. You were here last night? He asked quietly. I came to leave a note for you, she said too fast. About the charity gala. Did you bring a recorder? Her lips parted, then closed again. She turned toward the window. This is absurd. Matthew looked at the guard. Can you play it? The man hesitated. It might still have power, sir. He pressed a small button. A faint red light blinked once, then steady. The room filled with a tiny hiss, followed by a woman's voice. He trusts me completely. By the time he signs the merger, it will all belong to us. Keep your phone close. I will call when it is done. The voice was unmistakable. Clara stepped back as if struck. That is not me. But her tone betrayed her. Matthew's face did not change. He only said, leave. Her mouth opened again, but no sound came out. The security guards did not touch her. They simply stepped aside, and she walked out slowly, heels clicking against the marble like fading thunder. Silence returned, heavy and complete. Lila stood near the desk, looking unsure whether she should stay. Matthew turned toward her. His voice had softened. How did you know to tell me? She hesitated. My grandmother says the truth makes noise when people try to hide it. I heard that noise last night. Matthew blinked, the words sinking deep. He sat down slowly, elbows resting on the desk. Your grandmother sounds very wise. She says people lie because they are scared, Lila said. But truth is not scary. It just hurts for a little while. He let out a breath he did not realize he was holding. For the first time in years, he felt something uncomfortably human shame mixed with gratitude. He looked at the ship again. The little recorder still sat inside it, lifeless now, but what it had captured had already changed everything. He glanced at the window where the sea glittered like 1,000 mirrors. The same waves that had carried his business now carried a whisper that had saved his dignity. Lila, he said quietly. Does your mother still work here? Yes, sir. She cleans the top floor at night. He nodded slowly. Tell her she has the rest of the week off with pay, and tell her I said thank you. The girl blinked, surprised. Thank you for what? He looked at her and smiled faintly. For raising you to speak when it mattered. Outside, a gull cried above the bay. The echo drifted through the open window, sharp and distant. Inside, the child stood still. Her reflection beside his in the glass, a man who had power and a girl who had truth. Both now understood the same thing. Sometimes the smallest voice can be the loudest sound in the world. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall glass windows, painting soft gold across the marble floor of the office. Hours had passed since the recording had been played, but its echo still lingered in the corners of Matthew Caldwell's mind. The air no longer carried the sharp chill of suspicion. It was now heavy with silence and consequence. Clara had left the building without a word, escorted only by her own shadow. The ship, stripped of its secret, rested on the desk like a hollow shell. Matthew stood by the window, hands deep in his pockets, staring at the docks below. The rhythmic sound of waves brushing against the hulls of boats mixed with distant gulls. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a man who had been exposed not for wrongdoing, but for blindness. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Lila stepped inside, her small shoes making almost no sound on the floor. She held a paper cup of water with both hands. My mama said you should drink something, she said softly. Matthew turned. Her voice broke through the fog in his head. Your mother is very thoughtful, he said. She said people look tired when they think too hard, Lila replied. She walked closer and placed the cup carefully on the corner of his desk. You were looking out the window for a long time. He gave a faint smile. I was thinking about how something so small changed so much. He nodded toward the ship. That little recorder nearly cost me everything. Lila looked at the model, her eyes curious. It is strange, right? how a thing that fits in your hand can carry so many lies. Matthew's gaze followed hers. Yes, and how one sentence from you carried the truth. For a moment, neither spoke. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the air vent and the faint creak of the model ship's mast as it settled in place. Do you like the sea? Lila asked suddenly. Matthew nodded. It is where I built my first fortune. Cargo ships, trading routes, contracts. His voice drifted, but lately I have only looked at it from behind this glass. My grandma says people forget what things sound like when they stop listening, Lila said. Maybe the sea misses you. Her words landed gently, but they carried weight. Matthew felt something stir, a longing he had buried under years of meetings, deals, and silence. Your grandmother sounds like she has lived many lives, he said quietly. She says she just watched a lot, Lila smiled. Watching helps you see what others pretend not to see. He turned fully toward her then, really seeing her for the first time. Not as a child who had interrupted his morning, but as someone who had shifted the axis of his day with a whisper. You were very brave, he said. I was scared, she admitted, but my grandma says being scared is fine, as long as you do the right thing anyway. Matthew nodded. The simplicity of her words pierced deeper than any boardroom lecture he had ever heard. He walked back to his desk and picked up the recorder. It was silent now, but he could still feel the hum of betrayal in its weight. You know, he said, I spent most of my life building things, ships, companies, walls, and yet none of them protected me from one lie. Lila looked at the small device in his hand. Walls keep things out, she said, but they also keep you from hearing. He let out a quiet laugh, not out of humor, but out of realization. You are right. He set the recorder down and rubbed his temples. I owe you more than a thank you, Lila. You helped me see clearly. I did not do it for money, she said quickly. I just did not want you to get hurt. I know, he said. That is what makes it matter. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small silver pin shaped like a compass. It was old, polished, smooth by time. My father gave me this when I was your age, he said. He said a compass only points north, but you have to be the one who decides where to go. He placed it in her hand. Keep it. You remind me of what direction really means. Lila looked down at the compass, her fingers tracing the small letter N. Does it still work? It works as long as you believe in where you are going, he said. She smiled, her dimples deepening. Then, I will keep it safe. Just then, the elevator dinged outside the office. A woman in a janitor's uniform appeared, Lila's mother. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes softened when she saw her daughter. Lila, I told you not to bother anyone, she said gently. She did not bother me, Matthew interrupted. She helped me. The woman looked surprised. Helped you, sir? Yes, he said. More than most adults ever have. He glanced at Lila. You raised her well. The woman's eyes glistened with pride. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. He nodded toward them both. You should go home early today. Spend some time near the water. It has a way of clearing things. As they left, the door closed softly behind them. Matthew stood again by the window, watching the two figures walk along the sidewalk below. The little girl's backpack bounced with each step, the compass pin catching the sun in tiny flashes. The sea outside kept rolling in steady rhythm, patient and eternal. Inside the office, the man who once believed power came from silence now understood it had always lived in small voices that dared to speak. The evening fog rolled in from the harbor, soft and silver, wrapping the city in a quiet haze. Matthew Caldwell stood at his office window long after most of his employees had gone home. The lights of the pier shimmered across the water like threads of broken glass. He should have felt relief that the deception was over, but the stillness inside him was uneasy. Truth had stripped away the lie, but it had also left behind a silence that demanded something more. He turned toward his desk. The model ship was gone. He had given it to security for evidence, but its absence made the office feel larger and emptier. In its place lay the compass pin's twin, his father's old one. He touched it lightly, remembering how his father used to say, "A man is lost only when he stops listening." There was a knock on the glass door. Lila and her mother stood there, hesitant to enter. Matthew waved them in. "You came back," he said, surprised. Lila's mother nodded, clutching her purse. "Lila said you wanted to see where we live. I thought maybe she misunderstood." Matthew shook his head. She did not misunderstand. I wanted to understand more about her world, the one I have not seen. The woman looked unsure. It is nothing special, sir. Just a place under the highway bridge. It is temporary until I can find something better. That is exactly why I need to see it, he said gently. May I come with you? The woman hesitated, but something in his tone soft, genuine made her nod. They left the glass tower together. Outside, the air smelled of salt and diesel. The streets were quieter now, washed by the fading light. Lila walked between them, her small hand swinging at her side. She looked at the water instead of the cars. The sea looks different at night, she said. It does, Matthew replied. It hides the rough parts. She looked up at him. People do that too. He smiled faintly, struck again by how her words carried weight beyond her years. They turned off the main road, following a narrow path beneath an overpass. The air grew colder, the sound of cars above turning into a steady roar. Lila's mother led them to a dry corner where a few cardboard sheets were stacked neatly beside a worn blanket. A lantern flickered weakly beside a cracked thermos. This is it, she said quietly. It keeps the wind out. Matthew looked around. The place smelled of damp concrete and metal, but it was clean. Everything was folded, arranged, cared for. The dignity in that small order moved him more than he expected. Lila crouched to arrange the blanket flat again. Sometimes the cars sound like waves, she said. That helps me sleep. He swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. His world had been made of walls, penthouses, and marble floors. Hers was made of noise, patience, and courage. Both were fragile in their own ways. Her mother spoke softly. I clean 3 buildings, sometimes 4, depending on who calls. I do not like to bring her here, but shelters are full most nights. She never complains. Lila smiled. I like the stars here. You can see them better than in the city. Matthew tilted his head back. Through the gaps in the overpass, a few stars glimmered faintly. You are right, he said. They shine harder when there is less light to fight against. Her mother lowered her eyes. We will not stay here forever. I just need time to save a little. He nodded. You should not have to do this alone. He paused, then added, I have an idea. The Caldwell Foundation owns several unused apartments near the docks. They were meant for visiting engineers. They are clean and safe. You can move there tomorrow if you want. The woman stared at him, speechless. Sir, we cannot afford anything like that. It will not cost you a cent, he said. Call it repayment for the truth your daughter gave me. Lila looked up, eyes wide. We can really live by the water? Yes, Matthew said, where the sea sounds like waves and not cars. Tears filled the woman's eyes. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. Thank you, he smiled gently. You do not owe me thanks. I owe you both something more valuable than money. Lila tilted her head. What is that? He thought for a moment before answering. A reminder that people like me can forget what kindness looks like until someone small and brave shows us. They stood there in silence for a while. The distant hum of traffic faded beneath the rhythm of the tide. Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out the compass he had given her. She held it up toward the faint light of the lantern. It still points north, she said. Matthew nodded. Then it is still working. Maybe it wants you to find your way too, she said simply. He felt the corner of his mouth lift into a real smile, the kind that did not need to be practiced. Maybe it does. When they walked back toward the city lights, the fog had lifted just enough for him to see the outline of the bay again. It shimmered softly, like a secret that had finally decided to tell the truth. Behind them, the sound of waves and the quiet footsteps of a little girl carried the simple rhythm of something new beginning 2 worlds, once divided by glass and silence, now walking side by side. The next morning rose clean and bright, washing the city in a soft gold light that bounced off the harbor. The sea breeze drifted through the open balcony of the apartment Matthew Caldwell had promised. It was not grand, but it was safe. 2 rooms, warm water, and wide windows facing the ocean. The walls still smelled faintly of new paint and salt. Lila stood barefoot near the glass, her palms pressed against it as she watched the ships move slowly across the water. Her hair caught the sunlight, glowing in streaks of bronze. Behind her, her mother folded the last of their few clothes into a dresser. It feels strange, she said quietly, half to herself. To have a place where you can lock the door and not worry. Lila turned around. It feels like the sea can see us now, she said. Before, it only sounded close. Her mother smiled and brushed the girl's cheek. You always say things that make me think. Before Lila could answer, there was a knock at the door. When her mother opened it, Matthew stood in the hallway, holding a paper bag from the bakery downstairs. I thought you might need breakfast, he said with a small smile. The smell of bread makes a new place feel more like home. Lila ran to the table as he set the bag down. The warm scent of croissants filled the room. She looked up at him. Do you eat breakfast with people a lot? He laughed softly. Not usually. Most mornings I only talk to emails. She tilted her head. Emails cannot talk back. Exactly, he said. That is why it gets lonely. They ate quietly for a few moments. The sound of the sea came through the open window, rhythmic and calm. Afterward, Matthew stepped onto the balcony, resting his hands on the rail. Your view is better than mine, he said. I have taller windows, but no one to look through them with. Lila joined him, standing on tiptoe to see over the railing. You can come here, she said simply. He looked down at her. That might be the best invitation I've had in years. Her mother spoke from inside. Mr. Caldwell, you have already done so much. I do not want to take more of your time. He turned back. You have not taken anything. You have reminded me that time is supposed to be given, not guarded. She smiled politely but said nothing. Gratitude had taken the place of words. Later that afternoon, Matthew invited them to his office building. I have something for you both, he said. They rode the elevator up together. Lila held her mother's hand tightly as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, the office looked different from before. The model ship was gone, the desk cleared. In its place stood a framed photograph of the harbor and a small brass plaque engraved with 2 words, Truth Matters. Matthew gestured toward it. I thought it should stay where the lie began, he said. A reminder of what honesty looks like when it shows up uninvited. Lila touched the glass of the frame. It is pretty, she said. It is yours too, he told her, because you were the reason it exists. Her mother blinked in surprise. You cannot mean that, sir. I do, he said. And there is something else. He handed her an envelope. Inside are the documents for this apartment. It is now yours. Fully. The company will cover the utilities and maintenance. I will not take no for an answer. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. I do not know what to say. You already said it, he replied. You raised her to be brave. That is thanks enough. Lila looked up, unsure. Does that mean we can stay forever? As long as you want, he said. Homes are meant to be kept, not borrowed. She smiled so brightly that it made the office seem warmer. As they prepared to leave, Matthew stopped them at the door. One more thing, he said. Would you both have dinner with me tonight? Nothing formal, just something by the water. Lila's mother hesitated, but Lila answered first. If there is soup, I will come. He laughed. There will definitely be soup. That evening, the 3 of them sat at a small restaurant near the docks. The air was cool and smelled of salt and lemons. String lights shimmered above their heads, and gentle music drifted from a nearby speaker. Lila stirred her soup thoughtfully. Does it feel strange? She asked. When people you trust are not who you think they are. Matthew looked at her, surprised by the question. Yes, he said slowly. It feels like the ground moved, and you have to learn how to stand again. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. But sometimes the ground just wanted you to notice where you were stepping. He smiled. That is a wiser way to look at it. Her mother watched the exchange quietly, her expression soft. For the first time in years, she saw her daughter laugh without fear, and a man of wealth speak without pride. When dinner ended, the sky had deepened into indigo. They walked along the pier. The tide lapped gently against the wooden posts, and the air hummed with peace. Matthew stopped, looking out at the lights scattered across the water. You know, he said, yesterday I thought the world was falling apart. Today, I realize it might just be beginning again. Lila slipped her hand into her mother's and looked up at him. Sometimes beginnings sound quiet, she said, like waves that do not crash anymore. He looked down at her, his smile quiet but real. Then I hope this one lasts a long time. The sea answered with a soft rush of foam against the pier. steady and kind, like an unseen promise carried on the tide. The following morning came with the sound of gulls crying over the harbor and the slow hum of engines starting on the fishing boats. The apartment that once smelled of new paint now carried the faint scent of toasted bread and sea air. Lila sat cross-legged near the window, drawing ships on a notepad Matthew had given her. The compass pin rested beside her, its silver edge catching every bit of sunlight that spilled through the glass. Her mother was humming quietly in the small kitchen when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a uniformed man holding a sealed envelope. "Delivery from Caldwell Holdings," he said politely. She thanked him, closed the door, and turned the envelope in her hands. When she opened it, a short letter slipped out. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. It read, "Please meet me at the pier this afternoon. There is something I would like to show you both." It was signed, Matthew Caldwell. Lila looked up from her sketchbook. "Is it about the sea?" she asked, her eyes bright. Her mother smiled. "Maybe it is. Finish your drawing so we can find out." By late afternoon, the harbor was alive with color. Vendors called from their stalls, seagulls circled above the docks, and the smell of grilled fish mixed with salt and wind. Matthew waited near the end of the pier, dressed not in his usual suit but in a light sweater and jeans. He looked almost like someone ordinary, though the calm precision in his posture gave him away. When Lila and her mother arrived, he greeted them with a wave. "I am glad you came," he said. "I was beginning to think the wind scared you off." Lila laughed. "Wind cannot scare me. It only pushes me to run faster." "That is a good way to see it," he said. "Come, I have something to show you." He led them toward a small dock where a modest white sailboat was tied. It rocked gently against the tide. The name Second Chance gleamed on its side in navy letters. "Did you buy another ship?" Lila asked, her eyes wide. "No," he said softly. "I bought this one a long time ago, but I never took it out again after my father passed. It sat here collecting dust while I built bigger things and forgot why I loved the sea. I thought maybe today, with your help, I could remember." Lila looked at the boat carefully, running her hand along the smooth railing. "It looks like it wants to go somewhere," she said. "Then let us not make it wait," Matthew replied. He offered his hand to help them step aboard. The wind was cool but gentle. As the ropes were untied and the sail lifted, the boat glided forward, leaving ripples that shimmered gold in the late sunlight. The city began to fade behind them, replaced by open water and the clean smell of salt. Matthew took the helm. Lila stood beside him, her small fingers resting on the wooden wheel. "It feels alive," she whispered. He nodded. "That is the sea talking back. It has a way of answering those who listen." Her mother sat on a bench near the stern, watching them with quiet awe. "I have never been this far from the shore," she said. "You are safe here," Matthew told her. "The sea knows when it carries good people." They sailed for a long time, the only sounds being the whisper of wind against the sail and the steady creak of the mast. The air was sharp, but it carried peace. Lila's hair whipped across her face, and she laughed freely, a sound that made Matthew smile more deeply than he had in years. After a while, he reached into a small compartment near the wheel and pulled out a cloth-wrapped object. When he unwrapped it, there was a wooden box, no larger than a book. "I found this in the storage room yesterday," he said. "It belonged to my father. Inside are the logs from our first voyage together." He opened it. The pages inside were yellowed but neat. At the top of the first page, in ink faded by salt air, was written, "Always sail toward the truth, no matter the storm." Lila traced the letters carefully. "He sounds like someone who knew what mattered," she said. "He did," Matthew answered quietly. "And somewhere along the way, I forgot. You reminded me." The wind shifted slightly, sending the boat gliding in a long, smooth turn back toward the harbor. The sky was deep orange now, the sun sinking low over the horizon. Lila leaned on the railing, eyes wide with wonder. "It is like the world is on fire, but in a good way," she said. He looked out at the horizon and nodded. "That is what endings and beginnings look like. They burn the same color." When they reached the dock, the city lights had started to glow. Matthew helped them step off the boat. He paused, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small brass key. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Lila's mother. "It is the spare key to this boat. I want you to have it. Use it whenever you wish. It belongs to you now as much as it does to me." She stared at the key, overwhelmed. "Mr. Caldwell, we cannot accept this." "Yes, you can," he said firmly but kindly. "Because this boat was never meant to sit still, and neither were you." Lila held the compass in one hand and the brass key in the other. The two pieces gleamed together in the harbor light. "Now we can always find our way," she said. Matthew looked at her, his voice soft. "You already have." As they walked away, the wind carried the faint sound of the waves behind them, steady, calm, and endless. For the first time in many years, the man who had once built walls around his life felt something stronger than success. He felt peace. The following week brought soft rain over the harbor, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of gray and light. The apartment that once felt new now smelled of coffee and damp clothes drying by the window. Lila's mother sat at the small kitchen table, reviewing a letter printed on cream-colored paper. It was from Caldwell Holdings, marked with the company's seal, but the words inside made her pause every few lines. It was an invitation, official, formal, and kind. "The Caldwell Foundation would like to recognize your service and your daughter's courage at a small ceremony this Friday evening." The note ended with a personal signature, Matthew Caldwell. She folded it carefully and looked toward the living room, where Lila sat on the floor drawing again. "Lila," she said softly, "Mr. Caldwell wants us to come to an event, a fancy one, I think." Lila looked up, pencil still in hand. "Do we have to dress up?" Her mother smiled. "It says business casual, whatever that means." "It means not too shiny," Lila said, wrinkling her nose. "Maybe we can just wear clean things." That made her mother laugh, the sound light and easy for the first time in weeks. "Clean things it is," she said. By Friday evening, the rain had cleared. The air smelled of salt and spring, and the city lights shimmered in reflections across the wet pavement. When they arrived at the building, a large banner hung near the entrance, the Caldwell Foundation honoring integrity in action. Inside, the lobby glowed with soft amber light. Employees, guests, and a few journalists moved politely among tables of coffee and flowers. It was not a grand gala, but it carried an air of importance. Matthew greeted them at the door himself, dressed in a simple gray suit without the stiffness he once wore. His face brightened when he saw them. "You made it," he said warmly. Lila held up her small backpack. "We did not get lost. The compass worked." He smiled. "I never doubted it." They followed him into the main hall. At the front stood a podium beside a projection screen. On the screen was a photograph of the harbor, the same one Lila loved to watch from her window. Beneath it were the words, "Truth is the North." When everyone had gathered, Matthew stepped to the podium. The room quieted. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Tonight is not about numbers or profits. It is about something far rarer, honesty that costs something." He paused, his eyes finding Lila and her mother in the crowd. "A week ago, I learned that truth can come from unexpected places. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, small but steady. That whisper saved more than a business. It saved my own sense of what is right." The audience turned their heads toward the girl sitting in the front row. Lila shifted nervously, her fingers playing with the compass in her lap. Matthew continued. "This company has built ships, trade routes, and fortunes. But the most valuable thing we can build is trust. And it begins when someone speaks, even when no one else will." He gestured toward Lila. "This is Lila. She saw something wrong and chose to tell the truth, not for reward, but because she believed it mattered. That belief has reminded me and all of us that integrity is not a rule, it is a choice." Applause filled the hall, soft at first, then stronger. Lila blushed, lowering her head, unsure what to do with so many eyes on her. Her mother's hand rested gently on her shoulder. Matthew reached into his pocket and held up a small box. "Lila, would you join me up here?" She hesitated, but her mother nodded encouragement. Slowly, she walked to the podium, her steps small but steady. When she reached him, Matthew knelt slightly so their eyes met. "This," he said, opening the box, "is a medal the foundation usually gives to adult employees for extraordinary honesty, but today, it belongs to you." Inside the box lay a silver medallion engraved with a compass rose and the words "For Courage and Truth." Lila stared at it, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is beautiful. It is yours," he said, "because you remind us what truth sounds like when it finally speaks." He pinned it gently to her jacket, and the crowd applauded again. A few people wiped their eyes. Even the photographers lowered their cameras for a moment, letting the sound of clapping fill the space without interruption. When the noise faded, Matthew spoke once more, his tone quiet but firm. "I once thought power came from control. Now I know it comes from conscience. And if this company is to have a future, it will follow that compass, not the one made of steel, but the one carried by this young girl's heart." The applause rose again, steady and sincere. After the ceremony, guests approached to shake hands and offer smiles. Lila grew shy, retreating slightly behind her mother's leg. Matthew noticed and crouched beside her. "Too many people?" he asked gently. She nodded. "They all talk so loud." He smiled. "The sea is quieter. Maybe tomorrow we should go sailing again." Her eyes lit up. "Can we?" "Of course," he said. "The boat misses you." As they left the building, the night air wrapped around them, cool and clean. The moon hung low over the water, casting a white path across the bay. Lila looked up at her mother. "He is different now," she said. Her mother nodded. "Maybe he found his north again." Lila held the medal in her palm, feeling its weight and warmth. "Truth really does make noise," she said softly. Behind them, the banner at the foundation swayed gently in the breeze. And for the first time, Matthew Caldwell's world did not feel like marble or glass. It felt like open air, like wind moving forward, guided by the smallest, bravest voice he had ever heard. The morning after the ceremony arrived quiet and blue, with sunlight stretching thin over the calm harbor. The world seemed slower, gentler, as if it too was taking a breath after the applause had faded. Matthew Caldwell sat on the balcony of his apartment, a cup of coffee untouched beside him. The photograph from the event had already appeared in the newspaper, "The Girl Who Spoke the Truth." The headline was simple, but the story beneath it carried more than public admiration. It carried change. He read the article once, then set it aside. It was not pride that filled him, but a strange kind of peace. For years he had been the man who built things for control, contracts, companies, and walls made of glass and distance. Now, for the first time, he felt something stronger than control. He felt connection. His phone buzzed. A message appeared from Lila's mother. "We are at the pier. Lila says the boat looks lonely." A smile tugged at his lips. He replied, "Tell her I am on my way." When he arrived, the sea was calm, tinted silver under the early light. Lila sat cross-legged on the dock, tossing bits of bread into the water. Small fish darted toward the crumbs, leaving circles that rippled outward. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "You took too long," she said, her tone serious but her eyes bright. "I had to read the news," he said. "Apparently, you are famous now." She wrinkled her nose. "Famous sounds loud. I do not like loud things." He laughed softly. "Then we will keep it quiet between us." Her mother approached with 2 paper cups of coffee and a smaller one of orange juice. "She made me promise we could visit the boat today," she said. Matthew nodded. "Then we should not make it wait." They climbed aboard Second Chance. The wooden deck was still damp from morning dew. The sails were tied, fluttering lightly in the breeze. Lila moved about with the confidence of someone who already belonged there. She placed the compass near the helm, right where it had been before. "It points the same way every time," she said, studying the needle. "But I think it listens to people too." Matthew smiled. "Maybe it listens to the ones who tell the truth." He started the small engine, guiding the boat out into open water. The air was crisp and filled with the smell of salt. For a while, none of them spoke. The only sounds were the gulls calling and the rhythmic splash of waves against the hull. After some time, Lila's mother leaned back on the bench, her eyes closed, her expression calm. "It feels different now," she said. "Before, the sea used to scare me. It was too big, too full of things I could not see. Now it feels honest." Matthew nodded. "That is what the sea does. It never lies, even when it is rough." Lila stood near the bow, holding onto the railing. The wind lifted her hair as she looked toward the horizon. "It looks like the sky is touching the water," she said. "Maybe they are friends." He watched her quietly. "Maybe they are. One reflects the other. They sailed until the city grew small behind them. The waves rolled gently, carrying the sound of laughter and the creak of the mast. Matthew turned off the engine and let the boat drift. "You know," he said softly, "a week ago, this boat carried nothing but silence. Now it carries the truth, and it feels lighter." Lila looked down at the water. "Truth can float," she said. "Lies sink." He looked at her, his heart warmed by the simplicity of her wisdom. "You are right again," he said. Her mother opened her eyes, smiling faintly. "I think she gets that from my mother. She always said a lie is too heavy to carry far." They stayed on the water until the sun began to climb higher. The surface shimmered like liquid glass. When they finally turned back toward the harbor, Matthew felt something shift inside him. It was not regret, it was renewal. As they docked, a group of workers from the foundation waved to him. He waved back, but his attention stayed on the little girl who now hopped off the boat with a medal shining on her jacket. She looked proud but humble, like someone who had seen enough to understand both joy and sorrow. Before leaving, Lila turned back toward him. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "can I ask something?" "Of course. Do you ever get scared again after you find out the truth?" He thought about it for a long moment. The wind tugged gently at his sleeve. "Yes," he said, "but being scared is not the same as being lost. It just means you care about what happens next." She nodded slowly. "Then I think being brave just means caring a lot." He smiled, the kind that carried both pride and humility. "I think you are right about that too." Her mother called from the end of the pier. "Come on, sweetheart. Time to go home." Lila waved. "See you soon." He raised his hand in return. "You will." As they walked away, the sea shimmered under the sun, the water bending light into 1,000 small sparks. Matthew remained by the boat for a while, watching their figures grow smaller against the backdrop of the city. He realized that for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. The whisper that had once stopped a room now echoed softly inside him, not as warning, but as reminder. Truth had not only exposed what was wrong, it had rebuilt what could be right. And somewhere beyond the harbor, the waves kept moving forward, patient and steady, carrying with them the quiet courage of a little girl who had taught a man how to listen again. The following days unfolded with a calm rhythm that Matthew Caldwell had never known before. His mornings began not with the noise of business calls, but with the sound of the sea rising outside his window. He still wore his watch, still checked the time, but the ticking no longer chased him. It simply marked moments he could finally feel. At the harbor, the Foundation's new community program had begun. It was small, nothing like the grand ventures he once financed, but it mattered. He had turned part of an unused warehouse near the docks into a youth learning center, a place where children could study, read, and learn about the ocean. Lila had helped him choose the name. She called it the listening room. That morning, Lila arrived early, wearing her medal pinned proudly to her jacket. Her mother followed with a small bag of supplies, smiling when she saw the freshly painted sign over the door. "It looks wonderful," she said. "You have been busy." Matthew nodded, his tone light. "I needed to build something again, but this time, not for profit, for purpose." Lila peeked inside the room. The walls were painted in warm shades of blue and cream. Shelves filled with books lined one side, and in the corner stood a small aquarium where 2 goldfish swam lazily in circles. "It feels like the sea," she said. "But quieter." "That was the goal," Matthew said. "A place for voices that deserve to be heard." As the first group of children arrived, laughter began to fill the air. They were from the nearby neighborhood's sons and daughters of dock workers, vendors, and cleaners. Some carried notebooks, others came only with curiosity. Lila helped them find seats, showing them where to keep their things. Matthew watched her move among them with the natural confidence of someone who belonged. She had no hesitation, no fear. It struck him how much light one small person could carry into a room. After a short introduction, he asked everyone to gather around a large table. In the center sat a simple object, the same wooden model ship that once hid a recorder. Its polished surface now gleamed with sunlight, and where the hidden compartment had been, there was now a small plaque that read, "Let Truth Sail." This, Matthew said, was once a reminder of deceit. Today, it is a reminder of what truth can set free. I want you all to remember that your voices matter, no matter how small they seem. A boy raised his hand. Even if we are wrong sometimes? Matthew smiled. Especially then. Being honest about being wrong is still truth. It is what makes us human. Lila looked at the ship, then back at him. Does it still float? She asked. He chuckled. It might. Maybe we should test it one day. After the session ended, most of the children ran outside to the pier, where they watched the real ships drift in and out. Lila stayed behind, tracing her fingers over the ship's wooden deck. It looks different now, she said quietly. It is, he replied. Objects do not change by themselves. People change them. She nodded. You changed too. Matthew met her gaze. You helped me do that. She tilted her head. I did not mean to. That is the best kind of change, he said. The kind that happens without trying. They walked outside together. The wind off the water was cool and carried the faint scent of rain. Lila pointed to a group of fishermen unloading their catch. They always look tired, she said. But they keep working anyway. Because they believe it matters, Matthew said. Sometimes that belief is all that keeps us going. Lila looked thoughtful. My grandma used to say people get tired when they forget why they started. Maybe that is why you look less tired now. He smiled, surprised by how true her words felt. You and your grandmother share the same wisdom. I think she would have liked this place. She would, Lila said. She liked listening to people more than talking. Then she would fit right in, he said. As they stood there, a sudden breeze swept through, rustling the papers on the tables behind them. The smell of the ocean grew stronger. Matthew closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound of waves replace the constant hum that had once filled his mind. When he opened them again, he saw Lila standing near the edge of the dock, holding the compass he had given her. The sunlight reflected off its glass, casting a faint glow on her face. Does it still point north? He asked. She nodded. Always. But I think sometimes north is not just a direction, it is a feeling. He thought about that and realized she was right. Then I hope you never lose that feeling, he said. She smiled, tucking the compass safely into her pocket. I will not. You should not either. He watched her run toward her mother, who was waving from across the pier. For a long time, he stood there, the wind playing through his hair, the sound of the sea steady in his ears. In that moment, he understood that the truth he had once feared was no longer a weight, it was a compass of its own. It pointed him not to wealth or recognition, but to purpose, to people, and to the quiet kind of happiness that did not demand anything in return. Behind him, the door to the listening room remained open. Children's voices drifted through it, laughter, curiosity, and the simple sound of life moving forward. Matthew took one last look at the model ship before turning away. It no longer symbolized betrayal, it symbolized beginning. And as the waves rolled against the pier, slow and certain, he knew the little girl who had once whispered a warning had given him far more than truth. She had given him direction. The following Saturday arrived with skies clear as glass, and the kind of sunlight that made the harbor look alive. The tide was calm, and a soft breeze brushed across the piers. From the balcony of the community building, Matthew Caldwell watched the children gather at the listening room. Lila was already there, setting out notebooks on the long wooden table. Her mother stood beside her, helping to pour juice into paper cups. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the foundation ceremony, and life had begun to settle into a steady rhythm. Yet, for Matthew, nothing about this new rhythm felt ordinary. It carried meaning in every quiet gesture, every laugh, every moment of kindness that unfolded without being asked for. He walked down the stairs to greet them. You are early again, he said to Lila, smiling. Early means ready, she replied, her tone serious but bright. Then you must be the most ready person I know, he said. Her mother looked up. She woke before sunrise. She said she wanted to make sure all the pencils were sharp. Lila shrugged, hiding a grin. It is important work. Matthew nodded, taking a seat beside them. You are right. Small things done with care make big things possible. When the other children arrived, they gathered around the table as usual. The day's lesson was about the sea, how tides worked, what made the waves move, and why the moon mattered. Matthew used a small globe and a flashlight to show how gravity pulled at the water. The children leaned close, fascinated. Everything moves in cycles, he explained. The sea rises and falls. The sun sets and returns. Even people have tides inside them. When we make mistakes, we fall back. But when we choose truth, we rise again. Lila raised her hand. So truth is like the moon? In a way, he said. It does not change the sea, but it helps guide it. The lesson ended with laughter as the children took turns pretending to be the moon, spinning around the table with giggles and waving hands. When the group finally dispersed for lunch, Lila stayed behind, packing up the supplies. Matthew leaned against the window, watching her work. You really do like helping, do you not? She nodded. Helping makes me feel strong. He thought for a moment before speaking again. When I was your age, I thought strength came from being louder than everyone else. But you have shown me that real strength whispers. Lila looked at him curiously. You mean like when I whispered about the recorder? He smiled gently. Exactly like that. They both laughed softly, and for a long moment, the world outside seemed to pause in perfect stillness. That afternoon, the three of them took a walk along the docks. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, and the water reflected it in shimmering bands of silver and blue. Lila skipped ahead, stopping now and then to wave at the fishermen or watch the gulls dive for scraps. Her mother slowed her pace beside Matthew. She has been happier than I have ever seen her, she said. I do not think she understands what she gave you, but she feels it. I think she understands more than either of us realize, Matthew said. Children see things clearly because they are not looking for what they expect. They just see what is there. The woman nodded. You sound different now, too. Softer, maybe. He chuckled. Maybe truth works like the sea. It smooths what it touches. They stopped at the end of the pier, where Second Chance was docked. The sun glinted off its white surface, and the flag fluttered lightly in the wind. Matthew rested his hand on the railing. This boat used to mean something selfish to me, he said quietly. It was a symbol of success, of everything I could control. Now it feels like forgiveness. Lila turned around from where she had been leaning over the water. Boats forgive people? In a way, he said. They teach us to let go of what is heavy and keep moving forward. She looked thoughtful. Then I think the sea forgave you too. He smiled at that. If it did, I hope I earn it every day. Her mother looked out across the water. You already started to. This place, this program, it gives people hope. I have seen it in the other parents. They talk about you like you are different now. Matthew turned toward her. I hope I am. The man I used to be forgot what it felt like to listen. The girl your daughter has reminded me. A soft gust of wind rippled across the dock, carrying the smell of salt and faraway rain. Lila pointed toward the horizon, where a large cargo ship was making its slow path out to sea. Do you think they know where they are going? Matthew followed her gaze. Every captain believes they do. But sometimes the journey teaches them something the map cannot. She nodded slowly. Maybe that is why you needed a new compass. He looked at her, touched by the simplicity of her words. Maybe that is exactly why. As the sun began to set, the three of them stood there quietly, watching the colors change across the sky. The orange light reflected on the surface of the water, rippling like fire. Lila slipped her hand into her mother's and looked up at Matthew. When the sea gets dark, can you still see where you are going? He answered softly. If you carry truth with you, you never lose your way. She smiled. Then we will not get lost. The tide rose gently against the dock, steady and sure. Matthew felt the sound of it settle deep inside him, the steady pulse of something honest and whole. He realized that the world around him had not changed overnight, but he had. The whisper that once stopped a lie had grown into a voice that filled his days with purpose. And as the sky deepened into twilight, the man, the woman, and the little girl stood side by side, facing the same horizon, three lives carried by the same quiet tide, moving forward together, guided by truth. The next morning broke with a soft haze over the harbor, the kind that made the sea and sky look like they were breathing together. Seagulls floated above the still water, their cries sharp and distant. Inside the listening room, the air smelled faintly of paper, salt, and the new wood shelves Matthew had installed the day before. The room was quiet except for the sound of a pencil scratching against a page. Lila sat near the window, drawing the view outside the boats, the clouds, and a small figure that stood at the pier. It was Matthew. She added his reflection in the water, a soft line that faded into the ripples. When she was done, she held the paper up to the light and smiled. Her mother was sweeping near the door, humming an old tune that belonged to calmer days. Matthew entered with his usual gentle knock. "Good morning," he said. "You two are always the first ones here." Her mother looked up. "Old habits. I used to start cleaning before sunrise, and she never stopped waking up early after that." He smiled. "Some habits are good to keep." Lila turned her drawing around. "Do you like it?" He stepped closer to look. The image was simple but full of quiet detail, the way the sea met the horizon, the outline of the dock, the man standing alone but not lonely. "It is beautiful," he said. "You have a gift." She shrugged, but her cheeks flushed with pride. "It is just how it looked this morning. That is exactly why it is special," he said. "You see things the way they really are." A knock came from the outer door. One of Matthew's assistants entered, holding a small brown box. "This just arrived for you, sir," he said, "from your lawyer's office." Matthew took it and thanked him. After the man left, he set the box on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was the voice recorder that had once hidden in the model ship. The evidence from the investigation was now officially cleared and returned. For a moment, the room grew still. The little silver device lay quiet in the sunlight, harmless now. Lila looked at it curiously. "That is the thing that caused all the trouble?" He nodded. "Yes, it used to hold someone's lies. Now it is just a piece of metal." Her mother frowned slightly. "Are you sure you want to keep it?" Matthew rested his hand on the table. "I think I should. Not to remember the lie, but to remember what came after it." He picked it up, turning it in his palm. "This little thing changed my life. It made me face what I ignored for too long." Lila leaned closer. "What did you ignore?" He looked at her with gentle honesty. "The truth, that people are more important than power. I built walls and called them success, but all they did was keep me from hearing others. You knocked those walls down." She tilted her head. "I just told you what I saw." "And that," he said, "was enough." He placed the recorder on a shelf beside the compass and the framed photo from the ceremony. Together, they looked like pieces of a story, the whisper, the direction, and the moment truth had spoken out loud. Later that afternoon, the center filled again with children. Matthew taught them how to use maps and read coordinates. Lila helped a smaller boy trace the outline of a coastline, guiding his hand patiently. Her mother watched from the corner, a smile softening her face. When the lesson ended, Matthew called everyone together. "Next week," he announced, "we will start a new project. We are going to build a small model ship together. Each of you will help design a part of it. When it is finished, we will set it out on the water and let it sail." The children's eyes widened in excitement. "Can it have a name?" one girl asked. "It has to have a name," Matthew said. "That is part of the project. We will decide together." Lila raised her hand. "Can I suggest one?" He nodded. "Of course." "Oh." She thought for a moment, then said, "We could call it the Little Voice." The room went silent for a heartbeat before smiles spread across every face. Even the younger children who did not fully understand the meaning clapped their hands with joy. Matthew looked at her, his eyes soft. "That is perfect," he said, "because even a small voice can travel far if the wind is right." 1. That evening, after the children left, Matthew locked up the center and walked with Lila and her mother to the edge of the dock. The sky was painted in soft pinks and golds, and the tide was rolling in slow and steady. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent years thinking that peace came from standing still. Now I know it comes from moving with purpose." Her mother nodded. "And from knowing what matters." He smiled. "Yes, from that too." 1. Lila leaned over the railing, tossing a pebble into the water. It sank with a soft plunk, sending tiny rings outward. "Do you think everything we do makes ripples like that?" she asked. "I think so," Matthew said. "Even the smallest kindness can reach farther than we ever see." She watched the circles widen until they disappeared. "Then I hope the good ones go very far." "They already have," he said. The three of them stood there as the day folded into twilight. The horizon glowed faintly, and the first evening star appeared. In the distance, the lights of Second Chance shimmered where it was docked, quiet and steady. Matthew felt the recorder's small weight in his pocket, the memory of where it all began. He looked at the girl beside him, the one who had turned a secret into salvation, and knew that some stories did not end. They simply changed shape, like waves folding into one another, carrying truth onward, again and again. The following week arrived with clear skies and the steady rhythm of early summer. The air carried warmth, the kind that made the sea shimmer like a sheet of glass beneath the morning sunday. From the windows of the listening room, the light stretched across the tables where children worked on drawings and notes for their new project. The sound of pencils scratching mixed with the quiet murmur of voices. Matthew Caldwell stood near the window, holding a cup of tea instead of his usual coffee. The steam rose slowly, curling like breath in the sunlight. He looked over at Lila, who sat at the center table surrounded by a group of younger children. She was explaining how to shape the cardboard pieces for the model ship they were building together. "It has to float," she told them, "so the bottom needs to be strong and smooth, like a promise that does not break." The other children nodded, listening closely. Her words made Matthew smile. He walked over and set his cup down beside her. "I think you just invented a new kind of engineering," he said. Lila grinned. "I just want it to stay up when we put it in the water." "That is a good goal," he said. "Every ship needs someone who believes it can stay afloat." Her mother, who was organizing books at the back of the room, looked over her shoulder and said, "She has been thinking about this all week. I think she dreams about boats now." "I do not dream about boats," Lila replied quickly. "I dream about where they can go." "One." That answer made everyone in the room quiet for a moment. Then one of the younger boys said, "Can our ship go far enough to reach the moon?" Lila laughed. "Maybe, if we give it enough hope." Matthew watched her face light up as she spoke, and something stirred in him again, a quiet gratitude for the voice that had changed the course of his life. He had spent years chasing size, building bigger things, chasing louder goals. Now, he saw the beauty in what was small but sincere. After the day's lesson, when the children had gone home, Matthew stayed behind to help Lila and her mother clean up. They stacked the paper scraps and wiped the tables, leaving the room neat and calm. When the last light of day touched the walls, Lila placed the nearly finished model ship on the table. It was simple, made of cardboard, glue, and string, but to her, it looked like magic. "We are almost done," she said proudly. Matthew examined it with the care of someone who knew what it meant to build from nothing. "You did this beautifully," he said. "Every piece fits." She looked at him, curious. "When we finish it, will you come when we let it sail?" He met her eyes. "I would not miss it for anything." That evening, as the sun lowered over the harbor, they walked together along the dock. The sky had turned deep orange and gold, and the scent of salt grew stronger as the tide came in. Lila skipped ahead, humming softly. Her mother walked beside Matthew, her voice low. "She talks about you a lot," she said, "about how you listen when she speaks. It means more than you know." Matthew glanced toward the girl ahead of them. "She reminds me what listening really means. Before her, I thought it was about waiting for a turn to speak. Now I know it is about understanding." Her mother smiled. "That is something my grandmother used to say." I think your grandmother's words are finding their way into both of us," he replied. Lila stopped near the edge of the pier and leaned against the railing, watching the ripples form around the wooden posts. "The sea looks like it is breathing," she said. "It does," Matthew said. "Every wave is like a heartbeat. It never stops, no matter how quiet it gets." She looked thoughtful. "Do you think truth is like that too?" He nodded. "Yes, truth does not disappear when things get quiet. It just waits to be heard again." Lila smiled faintly and reached into her pocket, pulling out the compass he had given her. She held it in both hands. "It still works," she said softly. "Even when I am not moving, it knows where north is." Matthew looked at her, moved by the quiet conviction in her tone. "Then you have something rare," he said, "a guide that never lies." Her mother checked her watch and sighed gently. "We should head back. It is almost dark." They turned to leave, but before they did, Lila whispered something to the sea, a habit she had formed lately. Matthew did not ask what she said. He only watched as the wind lifted her hair and carried her words into the horizon. When they reached the apartment, she stopped at the door and looked back toward the harbor one more time. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not said anything that day?" He paused, Every day, he answered. And every time I think about it, I realize the same thing. You saved more than me. You saved what I was supposed to be. Lila's eyes softened. I just told the truth. He smiled. Sometimes that is all it takes. She nodded and went inside. Her mother thanked him quietly before following. Matthew stood there for a while, watching the light fade from the windows. The night smelled of rain and sea. He could hear faint laughter from the children playing somewhere down the street. When he finally walked back toward his car, he looked up at the stars beginning to appear. They looked like tiny sparks of truth scattered across the sky, distant but constant. And as he started the engine, he realized that the girl who had once whispered a warning had done something no one else ever could. She had turned a single act of honesty into a map he would follow for the rest of his life. The morning of the community event arrived with the scent of salt and fresh paint in the air. The final touches had been placed on the small model ship that Lila and the other children had spent 2 weeks building. It sat proudly at the center of the listening room, gleaming under the sunlight that poured through the wide windows. The name, The Little Voice, was carefully painted across the bow in steady blue letters. Lila stood on a stool, examining her work one last time. It looks ready, she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Matthew Caldwell smiled from across the room. It is more than ready. It looks like it could carry the whole truth across the ocean. Her mother laughed softly. Let us just hope it carries across the harbor first. The children began to gather, their faces full of excitement. The air buzzed with their chatter and energy. Each child had helped in some way, painting, gluing, tying strings, or cutting cardboard. The ship was not perfect, but it carried something better than perfection. It carried heart. Matthew raised his hand slightly. All right, sailors. Are we ready for the launch? Yes, the children shouted in unison. They made their way down the boardwalk, walking carefully in a long line toward the dock. The sunlight sparkled off the water, and the wind carried the scent of seaweed and distant rain. When they reached the end of the pier, Matthew set the small ship gently on the edge. Lila crouched beside him, holding the compass in her palm. Should we point it north before it sails? She asked. He nodded. That sounds like the right direction. She turned the compass slowly until the needle settled. Then, with both hands, she pushed the little ship into the water. It rocked once, twice, then steadied, catching the wind just enough to glide forward. The children cheered, clapping and shouting. It floats! It floats! Lila smiled so wide that her eyes glimmered. It is really sailing, she said. Her mother wiped at her eyes quietly. Matthew stood beside her, watching the tiny ship drift farther into the open harbor. You know, he said softly, I think this might be the first launch I have ever done that truly mattered. She turned to him, her expression gentle. Maybe because it was not about business this time. Maybe it was about belonging. He nodded. That is exactly what it was. For a while, everyone stood in silence, following the small vessel as it moved farther out. The sunlight danced over the waves, wrapping the ship in gold. One of the younger boys tugged at Lila's sleeve. Where do you think it will go? He asked. Lila thought for a moment. Wherever the wind wants to tell the truth, she said. The boy looked puzzled, but he smiled anyway. Then I hope the wind is kind. Matthew knelt beside Lila. You have a way of turning everything into poetry, he said. She shrugged lightly. It is just what the sea says when I listen. After the launch, the children returned to the community room for snacks and stories. Matthew watched them from a distance, the hum of laughter filling the air. He noticed how freely they spoke, how unafraid they were to share their thoughts. It reminded him of how silence used to feel heavy, guarded, and how this room had replaced it with light. As the afternoon passed, the last few families began to leave. Lila helped clean the tables, careful not to spill the juice. Her mother stayed behind to fold chairs. Matthew stood by the window again, his gaze drifting out toward the harbor. The small ship was long gone from view, but he could still feel its presence somewhere beyond the horizon. He turned to Lila. Do you think our little ship made it far? She smiled. I think it went exactly where it needed to. He nodded. That is a good answer. Her mother finished stacking the chairs. She says things like that all the time. I have stopped trying to understand and started trying to listen. Matthew chuckled. That seems to be the lesson she teaches everyone. The sun began to lower outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The golden light touched the compass that sat on the table, making it shine like a star. Lila walked over, picked it up, and handed it to him. "You should keep it tonight," she said. "You have been giving away all the good things lately." He shook his head. "It is yours. I gave it to you because it belongs with someone who knows how to follow it. But maybe it needs to remind you too," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment, moved by the quiet strength in her tone. Finally, he took the compass and slipped it into his pocket. "All right," he said, "just for tonight." As they stepped outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of the waves. The pier lights flickered on, one by one, casting small halos over the water. Lila's mother locked the door and turned to Matthew. "You did something good today," she said. "Something that will stay." He looked out over the sea. "Maybe, but it is not just me. It is all of us. It is her voice, your strength, and the truth that started it." Lila held his hand as they walked toward the street. "Do you think the sea knows our names now?" she asked. "I think it does," he said. "It remembers everyone who listens." They paused at the end of the pier, watching the last bit of sunlight fade. The horizon turned deep blue, and the first evening star appeared above it. For a moment, none of them spoke. The sea moved gently, steady, and endless. In that quiet, Matthew realized that the little ship was no longer just a symbol of truth. It was a message sent out to carry hope farther than words ever could, and as the waves carried it beyond sight, its name lived on in every heart that had seen it sail, the little voice that taught even the powerful to listen. The morning after the launch was quiet and golden, with a slow mist rolling in from the water. The air smelled faintly of seaweed and salt, and the dock was still damp from the night tide. Inside the listening room, the sunlight fell in long, soft lines across the tables. The sound of a broom sweeping mixed with the distant cry of gulls. Lila's mother was cleaning as usual, humming the same gentle tune she always sang when the day began. Lila sat at the window, chin resting on her hands. She stared out at the harbor, her eyes following the endless stretch of blue. "Do you think our ship is still floating?" she asked softly. Her mother paused, leaning on the broom handle. "I think it is," she said. "Things made with care find a way to last." Lila smiled. "Then maybe it will go around the whole world." "Oh, maybe it will," her mother said. "And maybe it will tell the world that people are still kind." A knock came at the door. Matthew Caldwell stepped inside, carrying a folded newspaper under one arm and a small brown envelope in his hand. "Good morning," he said warmly. "You two always make this place feel like home." Lila grinned. "You are late," he chuckled. "I will take that as motivation to wake up earlier." He handed the newspaper to her mother. On the front page was a photograph of the small ship floating on the harbor, taken the day before. The headline read, "The Little Voice, a community's symbol of hope." Her mother's eyes softened as she read. "They wrote about the children?" "They did," Matthew said. "The journalist from the local station happened to be at the pier. She said she had not seen something that pure in years." Lila looked up at him. "Did they write about you?" He shook his head. "They wrote about all of us, about what can happen when truth becomes action." He placed the small envelope on the table. "This is for you," he said to Lila's mother. She looked at it hesitant. "For me?" "Yes," he said. "It is a letter from the foundation. We are creating a new permanent role, community coordinator. I want you to take it. It is not charity. It is because you already do the work every day, and everyone here sees it." Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. "I do not know what to say." You already said it," Matthew replied. "Every time you opened this room, every time you smiled at someone who thought no one noticed them." Tears welled in her eyes. "I do not have the right experience. You have the right heart," he said. "That is what this place is built on." She pressed the envelope to her chest, speechless for a moment. Then she nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you," Lila beamed. "Does that mean my mom works for the foundation now?" Matthew smiled. "It means she helps lead it." The girl clapped her hands. "Then I am the helper of the leader." They all laughed together, the sound warm and full. As the morning went on, more children began to arrive for their daily session. The chatter filled the air again, and the listening room came alive. Some children worked on new drawings, others read books, and a few simply sat by the window to watch the sea. Matthew watched them quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "When I started my company," he said to Lila's mother, "I thought success was about how many ships I owned. Now I understand it is about how many lives stay afloat." She nodded. "And how many hearts you help carry." He smiled at that. "Exactly." In the afternoon, a light rain began to fall, tapping softly on the windows. The children pressed their faces to the glass, watching droplets race each other down the panes. Lila looked up at Matthew. "Do you think rain makes the sea happy?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe it reminds the sea that everything comes back in the end." She seemed to like that answer. "Then maybe the sea misses the sky when it does not rain." Her mother smiled. "You have a way of turning everything into something beautiful." "It is not me," Lila said. "It is just the truth, dressed up a little." That evening, after the children went home, Matthew stayed behind to help close up. They worked in comfortable silence, stacking chairs and turning off lights. When the last one was out, only the soft glow from the harbor lights filtered through the windows. Lila walked to the window one last time before leaving. "I still think about that little ship," she said. "Do you think someone will find it?" Matthew joined her. "Maybe someone already has. Maybe it found the right shore." She looked up at him. "If it does, will they know it came from us?" "I think they will feel it," he said, "because truth carries its own name." Her mother came to stand beside them, resting a hand on Lila's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. Time to go home." Lila turned back one more time to look at the sea. The lights danced across its surface like tiny stars. "Good night, little voice," she whispered. As they walked away from the dock, Matthew lingered for a moment. The air was cool, and the sound of the waves rose softly like a heartbeat. He thought of the ship somewhere out there, small but steady, carrying the spirit of everything they had built together. For the first time in years, he did not feel the weight of tomorrow pressing on him. He felt the quiet pull of hope, the kind that does not fade, only moves forward, carried by the tide. The next morning came with a soft glow across the harbor, the kind of morning that felt like a quiet promise. The air was cool, but sunlight stretched gently over the water, painting the waves with threads of gold. Inside the listening room, Lila was sitting at the large wooden table, her legs swinging under the chair. In front of her lay a new sketch, a picture of the little voice sailing beneath a rising Sunday. Her mother stood nearby, reading through the letter Matthew had given her the day before. The official words looked strange in her hands. The title Community Coordinator seemed almost too big to belong to her, yet she could not help but smile as she read it again. Matthew entered quietly, carrying 3 cups of hot cocoa from the cafe down the street. "You both beat me here again," he said. "At this rate, I'm going to start feeling like the late one every day." Lila grinned. "We wake up early so the sun does not forget us." He laughed softly. "I think it remembers you better than anyone." He set the cups down, and the sweet smell of chocolate filled the room. For a moment, they simply stood together, listening to the faint sound of the sea. The quiet felt like peace. Her mother folded the letter carefully and looked up. "I wanted to thank you again for this," she said. "Not just for the job, but for believing I could do it." "You did not need me to believe it," Matthew replied. "You were already doing the work. I just gave it a name." Her eyes softened. "Still, it means everything." Lila took a sip of her drink and asked, "Does that mean my mom is the boss now?" Matthew smiled. "She is more than that. She is the heart of this place." Lila's eyes widened. "Then I will be the helper of the heart." "That sounds like the most important job of all," he said. As the morning went on, the children began to arrive. The room filled with laughter, chatter, and the soft thud of small feet against the floor. Lila helped hand out drawing paper while Matthew greeted each family by name. The sound of community had become the new soundtrack of his life, steady, warm, alive. By mid-afternoon, the rain began to fall again. It came gently at first, tapping against the windows like fingers keeping time. The children pressed their faces to the glass, watching the raindrops chase each other down the pane. "Looks like the sea is visiting us," one boy said. Lila nodded. "It misses the little voice." Matthew smiled at that. "Maybe it does." When the day's lesson ended and the families began to leave, The rain turned heavier. The sky outside had grown gray, and the harbor waves rolled higher than usual. Matthew stood near the window, watching the water churn. "Storm's coming in," he said quietly. Lila's mother looked concerned. "Should we close early?" "Maybe just for the afternoon," he said. "The wind looks rough." Most of the families had already gone, but a few lingered under the awning. The wind whipped across the dock, scattering bits of paper and sand. Lila pressed her hands against the window, staring out. "The sea looks angry," she said. "Not angry," Matthew answered, "just restless. Even calm things need to move sometimes." She thought about that for a moment. "Do you think the little voice is okay out there?" He looked toward the horizon, where the waves merged with the sky. "If it was built with truth, it will ride through any storm." Lila nodded slowly, comforted by his certainty. When the last family left, Matthew offered to drive them home. The rain was falling harder now, and thunder rolled faintly in the distance. They locked up the center, and as they walked toward his car, Lila turned back once more to look at the sea. "It looks wild," she said softly. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "The sea always calms after the storm, sweetheart." Lila nodded, but she kept watching until they got inside. As Matthew drove through the rain, the streets shimmered with puddles reflecting the city lights. The wipers moved in steady rhythm, clearing the windshield just enough to see the dark sky ahead. "I always used to hate storms," he said quietly. "They reminded me of losing control. Now, I think they remind me to let go." Lila's mother glanced at him. "You sound like someone who finally made peace with himself." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I did. Or maybe I finally learned that peace is not the same as perfection." From the back seat, Lila's small voice spoke. "I think storms are just the sky washing itself clean." He looked at her in the mirror and nodded. "That might be the best way I have ever heard it said." They arrived at the apartment building just as the rain began to slow. The world outside glistened in silver light. When they stepped out, the air smelled fresh, washed, and new. Before heading inside, Lila tilted her head toward the harbor. "Do you think the little voice is still sailing right now?" Matthew looked out into the fog. "Yes," he said softly. "It is still sailing, just like us." Her mother smiled and took her hand. "Come on, little sailor. Let us get you dry." Lila turned to wave. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." He waved back. "Good night, Captain Lila." As they disappeared inside, Matthew stood for a long moment by his car. The rain had stopped completely now. In the distance, lightning flickered once, far out over the sea. He imagined the small ship riding the waves light, brave, unbroken, and in that quiet, he understood something deeper than before. Truth was not only what revealed the light, it was what held you steady when everything else tried to pull you under. He closed his eyes, letting the scent of salt and rain fill his lungs. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the little voice was still moving forward just as they all were guided by faith, by courage, and by a whisper that had once saved them all. The morning after the storm was pale and still. A thin mist hung over the harbor, soft as breath. The sea, which had raged through the night, now lay calm again, its surface shining like glass under the early light. Gulls circled lazily overhead, their cries echoing through the quiet. Inside the listening room, the air smelled faintly of rain and salt. The wooden floorboards were slightly damp near the door, and the windows fogged where the warm air met the cool glass. Lila sat at her usual spot by the window, holding her compass in both hands. She turned it slowly, watching the needle find its place. Her mother swept the floor with slow, careful strokes, pausing every now and then to look outside. The sky was beginning to clear. A faint rainbow arched far above the harbor, thin but unmistakable. "Look," she said softly. "The sky is saying sorry." Lila smiled. "It looks like it is smiling again." A knock sounded at the door, and Matthew Caldwell stepped in. He carried a small thermos of coffee in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. "Good morning, captains," he said warmly. "I hope the storm did not scare you too much." Lila shook her head. It was loud, but it felt like the sea was talking. He smiled. Maybe it was. The sea always has something to say. Her mother set the broom aside. "You must have been worried about the boats last night." "I was," he admitted. "But everything held steady. The docks are strong, and the crew checked all the lines before the storm hit. He placed the newspaper on the table. On the front page was another picture of the little voice, taken before it disappeared into the horizon. The article beneath it told how the story had inspired other towns near the coast to start their own projects, places for children to gather, to build, to listen. Lila looked at the picture. "It is still famous," she said with quiet pride. Matthew chuckled. "It seems so. People are calling it a message in motion, a symbol of what truth can carry." Her mother smiled gently. "I never thought something made from cardboard and hope could travel this far." He nodded. "Neither did I, but it seems the world needed the reminder." Lila studied the picture again. "Do you think it really went that far? All the way to the next town?" He leaned down to meet her eyes. "I think it went exactly as far as it was meant to. Things built from honesty always find their way." She seemed satisfied with that answer. The rest of the morning passed quietly. The children arrived later than usual, still sleepy from the long night. Some brought stories about the thunder, others carried small branches or shells that the storm had washed ashore. Lila gathered them around and helped sort through their treasures. "Every storm leaves something behind," she said, arranging the shells by size. "You just have to look for what stayed." Matthew watched her with quiet admiration. There was something about the way she spoke, calm, certain, older than her years. She was no longer just the little girl who had whispered a warning in his office. She was the heart of this place, the voice that kept it honest. At lunchtime, the rain began again, light this time, barely more than mist. The children pressed their palms against the windows to trace the tiny rivers that formed down the glass. Lila looked up at Matthew. "Can we visit the boat again tomorrow? Second chance misses us." He smiled. "I think you might be right. We will take it out if the weather stays kind." Her mother looked up from her desk. "It would be nice to breathe sea air again." Matthew nodded. "Then it is settled. Tomorrow morning." That night, the harbor lights flickered against the water. The streets glistened under the rain, and the soft hum of waves filled the air. In his office, Matthew sat at his desk, the compass resting beside a photograph of the children. The needle pointed north, steady as ever. He opened a notebook and began to write something he had not done in years. The words came slowly at first, then naturally, like waves meeting the shore. "The truth is not a storm that destroys. It is the wind that clears the fog. It comes quietly, often through the smallest voice, and once it is heard, it never leaves." He paused, looking out at the water. The rain had stopped completely now. The reflection of the moon rippled across the harbor, bright and whole. Meanwhile, across town, Lila sat by her window, her compass glowing faintly under the lamplight. She whispered to it, as she often did before sleeping. "If you ever get lost, just follow the truth," she said softly. "It knows where to go." Her mother smiled from the doorway. "Who are you talking to?" "The compass," Lila said sleepily. "I was just reminding it what to do." Her mother chuckled and walked over to tuck her in. "Maybe it does not need reminding. Maybe it was made by someone who already knew." Lila yawned, her eyelids growing heavy. "Then maybe that someone knew me too." Her mother kissed her forehead. "I think they did." Outside, the tide rose gently, rocking the boats in their slips. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the little voice drifted still, its sails filled with wind and its path lit by moonlight. And in every heart it had touched in the man who learned to listen, the woman who found her purpose, and the child whose whisper had started it all. The truth kept sailing quietly forward, steady as the sea itself. The next morning broke wide and golden, with sunlight spilling across the calm harbor like liquid glass. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind air so clear it seemed to make every sound sharper: the hum of the docks, the flap of sails, and the laughter of gulls wheeling above the water. The listening room stood open again, its door propped wide to let in the warmth. The scent of salt and wood polish filled the space. Lila was already there, kneeling on the floor with a small bucket and sponge, scrubbing the last bit of mud the storm had blown in. Her mother sorted through papers at the back table, the official foundation forms spread out neatly before her. Matthew Caldwell entered quietly, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and bread. "Peace offering," he said, holding it out with a grin. "The bakery downstairs insisted I take the last batch of rolls. I think they knew who they were for." Lila looked up, smiling. "For us?" For you, he said. You and your first mate over there. Her mother laughed softly. Then you are the captain, I suppose? Maybe, Matthew said. But I think every captain needs someone to tell him where the wind is blowing. He set the bag down and looked around. The room looks perfect. You both worked fast. Lila nodded. We had to. The sea is coming to visit. He blinked, amused. The sea is coming to visit. She pointed toward the open window, where the sound of waves echoed faintly. Listen, it is closer today. Ah. Matthew tilted his head, and for a moment, he could almost believe it. The rhythm of the tide did sound nearer, like the harbor itself was leaning in to hear what they would say next. Maybe it misses the little voice, he said. Maybe, Lila replied softly. It might want to bring it home. Her mother straightened a stack of papers and said, If it does, I hope it comes back in one piece. That morning, the children arrived one by one, their voices filling the room with energy. The first thing they did was run to the window to check the sea. It looks calm again, one boy shouted. The storm did not win. Lila smiled. The sea never loses. It just changes. The class began with stories about the storm, what they had seen, what they had dreamed, and what they had found washed up on the shore afterward. A few had brought shells, others brought small bits of driftwood. One little girl carried a bottle with a torn note inside. Matthew took the note carefully and unfolded it. The paper was worn and damp, the ink faint but still visible. The words were simple. Keep going. Someone will hear you. He looked up, stunned for a moment. Where did you find this? The girl shrugged. On the beach near the rocks. My dad said it might have come from far away. Lila leaned closer to see. Her eyes widened. That looks like something the little voice would say. Matthew stared at the note again. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakably in harmony with what they had built together. Maybe it did, he said quietly. Maybe someone found it and sent its message back. The children crowded around, whispering excitedly. It answered us. It came back. The ship is still alive. Matthew smiled at their wonder. But inside, he felt something deeper, an echo of what he had almost forgotten. That truth travels, not always in the way we expect, but always where it is needed. He pinned the note to the wall beside the compass and the photograph of the ship. Above it, he wrote in careful letters. The little voice spoke back. When the children left that afternoon, the room was quieter than usual. Lila sat at the table, staring at the note. Do you think it really came from our ship? She asked. I think it came from what the ship carried, Matthew said, from the truth that left the harbor that day. Truth has a way of finding its way home. She traced the edge of the paper gently. Then maybe someone needed to hear it as much as we did. Maybe more, he said softly. The light through the windows began to shift as the sun lowered, painting the walls in orange and gold. Lila's mother closed the ledger and stretched. It is getting late. We should head back soon. Lila nodded, slipping her small backpack onto her shoulder. Before leaving, she looked one last time at the note pinned to the wall. I like that it said, keep going, she whispered. It sounds like something a wave would say. Matthew smiled. It does. The sea never stops moving forward. Neither should we. As they stepped outside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of rain. The harbor lights flickered on one by one, their glow rippling across the calm surface of the water. Lila stopped at the edge of the dock and looked out. If the little voice ever comes back, she said, we should build a place for it. Matthew raised an eyebrow. What kind of place? A home, she said. Not to keep it, but to remind everyone that it came from here. He nodded slowly. That sounds like a good plan. Maybe we will call it the Harbor of Voices. Her mother smiled. I like that. A place where truth never gets lost. Lila's face lit up. Then it will always know where to go. They walked home under a sky full of fading light. The sound of the tide followed them, steady and soft. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, a small ship drifted still, carrying words that had started as a whisper and had grown into something endless. For Matthew, that night felt different from all the nights before. The storm had come and gone, but what it left behind was not ruin, it was proof. Proof that kindness, once spoken, never vanished. It simply traveled, like waves, from one shore to the next. The morning came with a warm breeze that carried the faint scent of salt and sunlight. The sea was calm again, stretched wide and shining under a cloudless sky. The harbor seemed almost to hum with peace, as if it too was grateful for stillness after so many restless days. Inside the listening room, the walls glowed softly in the golden light, the note that had washed ashore the day before. "Keep going, someone will hear you," was now framed beside the photograph of the little voice. Lila sat beneath it, sketching quietly on a large sheet of paper. Her drawing showed a harbor surrounded by hands, each hand open and holding a tiny paper boat. Her mother was at the back table, sorting through schedules for new community classes. "The foundation wants to start weekend workshops," she said, her voice gentle but filled with purpose. "They asked if I could lead one about storytelling. They said it was Lila's idea." Lila smiled without looking up. "Stories travel better than boats." Matthew Caldwell, standing near the door, chuckled. "And sometimes they carry more people, too." He set down a folder he had been carrying and looked around the room. "It is amazing how full this place feels now," he said. "When we started, it was just empty walls and echoes." Her mother nodded. "Now it sounds like life." Lila looked up from her sketch. "It sounds like the sea when it is happy." Matthew smiled softly. "That is the best sound there is." The rest of the morning passed with the usual rhythm: children arriving, laughter filling the air, pencils scratching across paper. The group had grown larger now. There were new faces, new families who had heard about the listening room from the newspaper or word of mouth. What had begun as a small idea had turned into a growing wave of kindness and truth. At lunch, Matthew stepped outside for a moment. The sunlight was bright, and the harbor smelled fresh and clean. As he walked along the dock, he noticed an older man sitting near the edge, holding something small in his weathered hands. The man looked up as Matthew approached. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" the stranger said. "It is," Matthew replied. "You do not see the water this calm very often." The old man nodded. "Calm seas always come after the loudest storms." Matthew smiled faintly at that. "That is true." He noticed then what the man was holding: a tiny, sun-faded piece of cardboard shaped like a ship. Its paint was nearly gone, but faint blue letters could still be read on the side. "The Little Voice." Matthew froze. "Where did you find that?" The man looked down at the fragile object. "Washed up near the lighthouse this morning," he said. "I almost threw it away, but something about it felt different, like it was carrying a story." Matthew's throat tightened. He crouched down to look closer. It was battered, yes, but still whole, the same shape, the same careful craftsmanship he remembered from the day the children had built it. "It came back," he whispered. The old man nodded slowly. "Seems like it wanted to." Matthew took a deep breath, feeling something stir inside him: relief, wonder, gratitude all tangled together. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much this means." The man smiled. "Looks like it meant something to you before it meant something to me. Maybe it belongs where it started." Matthew accepted the tiny ship with careful hands, as if it were alive. The cardboard was soft from the sea, the paint faint but still there. It had survived storms, distance, and time, and somehow, it had found its way home. He returned to the listening room just as the children were finishing their afternoon projects. When he stepped inside, Lila noticed the object in his hands and gasped. "That is," he nodded. "Yes, it came back." The children crowded around, eyes wide, mouths open. "How? Where? Did the sea bring it?" Matthew placed the small ship gently on the table. "An old fisherman found it near the lighthouse. It traveled farther than any of us could imagine. And yet, it found its way home." Lila stared at it in awe. The edges were torn, the colors faded, but it stood upright and whole. "It listened," she whispered. "It heard the truth and followed it back." Her mother's eyes shone with quiet tears. "It looks tired," she said softly, "but strong." Matthew nodded. "It has been through storms." But it kept going, just like the message it carried. The children took turns touching it gently, as if it might break under their fingers. But it did not. It stood firm, small and sure, the way truth always does. When the room grew quiet again, Matthew looked at Lila. "You were right," he said. "The sea missed it, and it decided to bring it home." Lila smiled. her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we should give it a home." He nodded. "We will. We will build a glass case for it, right here in the center of the room. It will stay as a reminder that even small voices can travel far and still return." Her mother looked around the room, her gaze full of meaning. "Then it will be the heart of this place." "Yes," Matthew said softly, "the heart that listens." That evening, as the sun began to set, they placed the little voice in the center of the main table. The golden light touched its edges, making the faded paint gleam like new. The children sat around it silently, their faces glowing in the sunset. Lila leaned close and whispered, "Welcome home." Outside, the waves moved gently against the dock, steady and rhythmic. The harbor breathed, the world exhaled, and everything felt right again. For Matthew, it was more than just a moment. It was proof that truth, once set free, never disappeared. It found its way back, carrying every whisper of kindness it met along the way. The following day dawned quiet and silver, with soft light spilling across the harbor. The air held the gentle chill of early morning, the kind that made every breath feel clean and alive. Inside the listening room, the small ship, the little voice, rested proudly in the center of the table, protected by a clear glass case. The sunlight caught on its faded blue letters, making them gleam once more. Lila arrived early, as always. She placed her small hands against the glass, her breath leaving faint fog marks on the surface. "It really came back," she whispered, her tone half wonder, half disbelief. Her mother, setting down her bag near the desk, smiled softly. "It looks like it never left us at all." Matthew entered moments later, carrying a fresh pot of tea and a stack of envelopes. "Good morning, captains," he said warmly. "The hero of the harbor seems to have found its place." Lila turned toward him, eyes bright. "It is home now. It does not need to travel anymore." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe. Or maybe its journey is not over, it just has a new way to travel now." She tilted her head. "How can something travel if it is staying still?" He smiled. "Because stories move even when things do not. People will come here and see this ship, and they will carry its story with them wherever they go. That is how truth travels." Lila thought for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then the little voice can rest and still keep moving." "That is right," he said softly. As the day went on, visitors from nearby neighborhoods began to arrive. Word had spread quickly that the ship had returned. Parents came with their children, teachers with their students, each one wanting to see the tiny vessel that had somehow crossed the sea and found its way back home. Matthew stood near the doorway, watching as people gathered around the glass case. Their voices were hushed, almost reverent. Some smiled, others simply stood quietly, lost in thought. Lila moved through the crowd, explaining how the ship had been built. "We made it with cardboard and glue," she said, "and we gave it a name because names help things find their way. It carried a message too, truth and kindness. That is why it did not sink." Her mother listened from a distance, pride glowing behind her calm expression. When the crowd thinned later in the afternoon, Matthew joined Lila at the table again. "You have a way of explaining things that makes people believe," he said. She shrugged lightly. "It is not explaining, it is remembering." He smiled at that. "Then you remember beautifully." They stood together, looking at the ship under glass. The sun outside began to dip lower, turning the harbor gold. The reflection of the water shimmered on the walls, dancing across their faces. Lila's mother joined them, her voice soft but steady. "It feels different in here now," she said, "like it is breathing with us." Matthew nodded. "It is. This place was built on silence once. Now it is full of voices, some spoken, some carried on the wind." Lila pressed her hand flat against the glass. "It is still listening," she whispered. He looked down at her, his voice gentle. "And so are we." As evening fell, the last few visitors left, and the room grew quiet again. Outside, the sea reflected the fading sky. The waves moved in slow rhythm, steady and sure. Before locking up, Matthew turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the street lamps outside. It cast a faint halo around the ship, making it look almost alive, as if it were glowing from within. He stood for a moment beside Lila and her mother, the three of them watching in silence. Then Lila whispered, "Good night, little voice. You can rest now." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "It will always be here," she said. Matthew nodded, his voice low but filled with warmth. And so will what it taught us. As they stepped outside, the night air was cool and calm. The stars reflected on the harbor, scattered like tiny lights across the dark water. The sea moved gently, carrying the same rhythm it always had: steady, patient, eternal. For Matthew, for Lila, and for her mother, that rhythm had become something more than sound. It was the quiet pulse of truth itself, something small, something pure, and something that always, somehow, found its way home. The next morning arrived wrapped in soft golden light. The harbor was still, and the air smelled of salt, wood, and promise. Seagulls drifted lazily above the docks, their cries blending with the quiet hum of the waves. Inside the listening room, the sunlight filtered through the tall windows, landing gently on the glass case that held the little voice. The tiny ship glowed in the morning light as if it carried its own heartbeat. Lila entered first, her backpack bouncing lightly on her shoulders. She walked straight to the table and pressed her palms against the glass. "Good morning," she whispered. "You look happy today." Her mother followed behind her, carrying a basket of freshly baked bread. The bakery owner said, "These are for everyone," she said with a smile. "He said he read about the little voice and wanted to thank us for reminding him of goodness." Matthew arrived moments later, holding a folder and a small blue notebook. "Good news," he said warmly. "The City Council has approved funding for new community centers modeled after the listening room. They want to call them the Voice Projects." Lila's mother gasped softly. "That means this story will reach more people." Matthew nodded. "Yes, it started with one whisper, and now it will reach thousands. It is proof that the smallest truth can move farther than we ever imagined." Lila looked up at him. "So the ship is still traveling, even though it is staying here?" He smiled. "Exactly. Its message is still sailing, carried by everyone who believes in it." They shared a quiet moment, each of them taking in the truth of what had grown from that single act of courage. The room that had once been an empty space now stood as a living story, a place built from honesty, hope, and one little girl's voice that had refused to stay silent. As the day went on, the children arrived one by one. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the air again. Some of them gathered near the ship, pointing and whispering, while others sat to draw or read. The energy was light, alive, and full of belonging. Matthew watched from the doorway, his hands resting on the frame. He turned to Lila's mother. "When I first met you both, I thought I was the one giving. Now I see that I was the one receiving," she smiled gently. "Sometimes giving and receiving are the same thing. They meet in the middle, like the sea meeting the sky." He nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. "You are right. I think that is what truth feels like too. It meets you halfway when you are ready to hear it." Lila ran up just then, her cheeks flushed from excitement. "Mr. Caldwell, look," she said, holding up her drawing. It showed the listening room, the harbor behind it, and the small ship floating in the middle of the sea, surrounded by beams of light. At the bottom she had written carefully, "The sea listens when we do." Matthew looked at the drawing for a long time, then smiled. "That is perfect," he said softly. "May I keep this one?" She nodded. "It belongs to all of us." He placed the drawing beside the glass case, right next to the little voice. The two seemed to belong together, one made of cardboard and glue, the other made of paper and hope. As the afternoon sun began to fade, the light turned warm and soft. Lila and her mother packed their things, and the children waved goodbye as they left. Matthew stayed behind for a moment, standing alone in the quiet room. The reflection of the ship shimmered faintly on the glass, and he could almost hear the whisper that had started it all, small, steady, and true. He spoke into the silence. "Thank you," he said, "for finding me when I was lost." Then he turned off the lights and stepped outside. The sky above the harbor was painted in orange and silver. The tide moved gently, as if nodding in rhythm with the world. At the end of the dock, Lila turned back toward him. "Do you think the sea will remember us?" she asked. Matthew smiled, his voice warm and sure. "It already does, and it always will." The wind lifted softly, carrying the sound of her laughter out over the water. The waves answered in their timeless way, steady, kind, and endless. And as the sun sank below the horizon, the little voice remained in its glass case, glowing faintly under the soft evening light, a symbol of one truth, one whisper, and one small girl who taught an entire world to listen again.